So today we are going to talk about how to monitor conversations on social media. We're going to talk about our team's approaches to monitor online conversations and also give you some of our top tips for a number of platforms. So we're going to look at Twitter, Facebook, Google, Reddit, etc. My name is Esther Chan. I'm First Draft's APAC Bureau Editor and I'm based in Sydney. Okay, so let's talk about different approaches to monitor conversations online, on social media specifically. So we think we really should try to distinguish between proactive and reactive monitoring. And what do we mean by proactive monitoring? So proactive monitoring is when you've set up a dashboard with a series of queries to catch things ahead of time, and then you learn about what people are saying live, right? Also, it's a way to learn about something that's becoming a trend before it's news. So it kind of allows you to capture information before it gains traction. On the other hand, reactive monitoring is when we are responding to a news event after it happens. So here's an example about Facebook's news ban in Australia a few weeks ago. So we wanted to look at what effect that policy had on vaccine misinformation on Facebook. So after the announcement, we did a quick search on 4chan for Australia and vaccine and Facebook to see if there were 4chaners talking about it, and if they did, what the main narratives were. So that's an example of reactive monitoring because something has already happened. And then you're looking at the reaction to it rather than setting up a dashboard ahead of time to collect what people were talking about this particular subject, right? So another thing is we don't do proactive monitoring for every platform. For example, we don't do as much proactive monitoring on 4chan, and there are many different reasons for this. We don't want to be spending all our time on a platform like 4chan, first of all, but more importantly, we want to try to avoid amplifying claims that could be potentially inaccurate. So, when you're setting up proactive monitoring, there's actually more of a danger of you amplifying misinformation. Because when you look at things that are not necessarily viral yet, and let's say if you have the habit to tweet about things that you think are newsworthy, chances are sometimes you could risk amplifying misleading information that hasn't even been picked up yet. So we should be careful about that. Another thing that's important to think about is which platforms are relevant to you. So depending on the country you're tuning in from, different platforms have different popularities. So here's some data on the leading social media platforms in Argentina in 2018. And you can see in this data, Twitter is not nearly as popular as YouTube or Facebook. And that's also actually true in a lot of other countries. So if a platform is not as popular, then you might not want to spend as much time monitoring it proactively or setting up dashboards for it. And how much time do I have is another question you really should ask yourself. So when we're trying to starting an extensive research project, we will often start by making a spreadsheet to organize our topics in keywords before we go ahead and set up any dashboards, right? So you can see that in this little screenshot here, that we've organized our columns into different topics. So for example, in this column, we have words that are generally about vaccines. And then in this one, we have words that deal with profit and economic concerns. So big pharma, corporate profit, legal immunity, that kind of thing. We also have columns with keywords about politics or lockdown and civil liberties. So words like quarantine, freedom, constitutional rights, control, etc. So also we have words about conspiracy theory. And then we'll often make different tabs for different platforms too. So maybe we'll make a list of Facebook groups that we want to keep tabs on. And this is particularly helpful if you don't have access to CrowdTangle to monitor Facebook. Another thing that you want to ask yourself is what devices you're using for monitoring conversations online. Are you using your personal device, a work laptop, or have you got any security protocol in place? So these screenshots here show two different Facebook groups. On the left, we have a Facebook group that's public. It has over 3,000 members, and it's titled Coronavirus Questions, Answers, and Info in Naples, Florida. And on the right, we have a group that's private. It's called Vaccine Choice, South Florida, and it has only 912 members. So if you're interested in seeing what people are saying in a Facebook group for professional purposes, then you might want to consider getting a burner phone. Now, it kind of depends on the kind of groups you want to join. You might be comfortable joining a group that's public and has 3,000 members, and it's generally about coronavirus questions, answers, and info, because you're probably not going to be as noticed, right? However, if you're joining a private group that has only 900 members and is associated with a very specific ideology, so vaccine choice, it's often a term that people who are skeptical of vaccines use, right? And you might want to be more cautious about joining a group like this. And actually, we're going to talk about this in the next session, which is about monitoring closed groups and messaging apps. So stay tuned for that. And moving on, we have some tips for different platforms. So for Facebook, the first thing I would recommend is CrowdTangle Live Displays. So CrowdTangle is a platform for monitoring Facebook, and they have some free resources. And one of the free resources they have is coronavirus dashboards that collect posts from people talking about the pandemic, and they have one for many places in the world, like Australia, New Zealand, India, Indonesia, Taiwan, Hong Kong, etc. So you can go to this URL here, and then you can click on your country, and they will have a whole bunch of interesting columns for each place. For example, a column for local media reports, another one for politicians talking about COVID, and also a column for some of the most popular COVID-related Facebook pages that are getting the most engagement on the platform. So it does give you a quick window into what's happening on Facebook in that particular location. Then we have another little tool here, which is site searches. We talked about this in the last session. A site search is one of the most useful things to help collect information from platforms such as, like Facebook pages and groups, which may not always show up if you do a search on Facebook. So one of the most common scenarios when site search is helpful is when you try to look up pages and groups that have had their visibility reduced, maybe because of Facebook policies. So for example, if you type in vaccine, you want to look for a page or group about vaccines. I mean, they're still around, but they would not show up because Facebook is trying to direct people to credible sources of public health information. So you see links to the WHO, your local health authorities, but not those groups that you're looking for. And in this case, you can do a site search on Google or other search engines. So site:facebook.com/groups, and then your search term like Florida vaccine. And then Google would pull up Facebook groups related to Florida and vaccine. So that's pretty handy. And then once you find these groups, you can then add them to a tab in your spreadsheet, keeping everything organized. So that's the way around monitoring Facebook if you don't have access to CrowdTangle. If you have it, great, because that's very useful in, you can set up lists to monitor public Facebook pages and groups, and you may not need a spreadsheet as much. Next up, Twitter. So we tend to rely on TweetDeck to monitor Twitter. It's free to use. If you have a Twitter handle, all you have to do is to go to tweetdeck.twitter.com. So TweetDeck can do a lot of different things. It supports Boolean search queries. So if you're here last time, we talked about Booleans and we practiced writing them. You can also use that to keep track of the trends in your particular area, filter top posts by engagement, add lists of accounts. You can also find posts in a particular area. So let's have a look. I'll show you how to do that. Let's make this bigger. Oh. Okay, so tweetdeck.twitter.com. So this is my TweetDeck with many, many columns. I'll show you in a second. So I actually added a lot of these in the past when I had to monitor breaking news every day. So I still have all these lists. But what we're trying to do here is we can add a column. So here, add column and search. And let's say if I want to look at online narratives about the Pfizer and AstraZeneca vaccines in Australia and New Zealand. So I will write a Boolean query, Pfizer or AstraZeneca and Australia or New Zealand. So don't forget the quotation marks. Okay. So let's move to, oh my God. So here it is, it's at the end. This is my new column. So I'm looking for online narratives about Pfizer and AstraZeneca in Australia or New Zealand. And now I have this stream of tweets on the topic, right? So you can also do some filtering. You can filter by location. So let's say if I want to look at tweets from people who are based in Australia and New Zealand and not from somewhere else talking about this, then I can type in here, Australia, New Zealand. And I can also filter by engagement, where you can choose, for example, only show me tweets that have been retweeted for like 100 times or something like that, right? So another thing, though, to pay attention to is if you set up a few columns for your searches, you want to try to make this first bit obvious, because you can't really name these columns, the search columns. So when you have more than one, like if you have 5 or 6, you want to be able to know what they're about at a glance, right? So yeah, so that's TweetDeck. And then next, let's talk about Google Trends here. So we go to trends.google.com, right? This is the landing page for Google Trends. And somehow mine is automatically set to the US, but let's take a look anyway. So on the US page, there's a section here about coronavirus search trends. Let's take a look at what are trending. So in the world, trending queries on vaccine in the past day. In Italian, when am I getting vaccinated? CDC vaccination guidelines, which is new. I think they talked about mask as well. So apparently the CDC vaccine guidelines are the most popular in the past days, which makes sense. And if you're not interested in the US, obviously you can change it to your own country. So for example, let me change the location to Australia. And if you go to the topic section here, it doesn't seem like it has the coronavirus one, but it should do. So you click more, and here it is, coronavirus Australia. And let's have a look to see what's trending. Okay, trending searches for coronavirus past 7 days. Brazil coronavirus. So this is probably related to the new variant found in Brazil. Adelaide coronavirus update. So that could be related to a news report that they found the virus in wastewater coming from Adelaide. So yeah, and then also Apart from that, you can also just type in your own searches, right? You can search your vaccine, COVID, or something like that. What I'm going to do here is try to compare vaccine in traditional Chinese in two places that use the language, which are Hong Kong and Taiwan, right? So this is vaccine in traditional Chinese. And I want to look at how it's performing in Hong Kong in the past 7 days. Okay. Well, I want to scroll down, but it's not letting me. Anyway, the top related query is South Korea vaccine deaths. So I think that's related to a recent report about, I think there were 8 deaths reported in South Korea, people getting after they got vaccinated. So, okay, vaccine Hong Kong past 7 days. Apart from South Korea vaccine deaths, what other things are trending were Sinovac vaccine instruction booklet. So obviously in Hong Kong, you get the BioNTech and Sinovac vaccines available, and there have been some deaths of people getting Sinovac. So understandably, people want to look at more information about it. Okay, let's switch to Taiwan in the past 7 days with the same search term, vaccine in traditional Chinese. So related queries, South Korea vaccine deaths again. But the different thing, a different trending item in Taiwan is AZ, vaccine production country. So I guess in Taiwan, they get AstraZeneca and they want to know where it's made. So you can go to Google Trends and play around a little bit. It's a lot of information there. And also you may find some good ideas for news stories. Another thing, another handy feature on Google is that you can set up alerts for keywords related to topics that you're monitoring and get those alerts in your email. So for example, if you type in vaccine, you can then create alerts. But before doing that, you can also hit show options. And then you can choose how often and in what language you want to receive those alerts in. Also, back to the landing page, you can see that you can also choose to receive notifications about yourself, let's say when you're mentioned online, or you can set up alerts for your organization. So if, say, your news organization is mentioned by someone else, or you can just keep track of all those things. So that's pretty useful. And let's go back to some other platforms. If you're interested in Reddit, Reddit also supports Booleans, so you can actually use the native search bar to search Booleans. And here I have Pfizer or AstraZeneca and Australia. So I can find discussions about the 2 kinds of vaccines available in the country, right? You can also, play around with these settings a little bit, like best results, top, in the past 24 hours or the past 7 days or something like that. And then same with TikTok. We don't have a dashboard to monitor TikTok, but it can be a really interesting place to, you type in a topic like vaccine in the search bar and see what comes up. So you can see what comes up automatically and check out the most popular hashtag. Sometimes it can be quite surprising what you find there, because TikTok actually has all kinds of content and not just dance videos. And as you can see here, the first things that came up when I typed vaccine is vaccine side effects, vaccine conspiracy, vaccine reaction, right? So these are some indicators on what people are talking about when they talk about vaccines on TikTok.